My name is Elizabeth Grant, and the last time I poured my husband a glass of wine, it cost him his empire. It happened on a Thursday night in Chicago during a dinner meeting with his investors, the kind of dinner where men talk about millions like they're talking about weather, and the wives just smile politely. I'd been through hundreds of those dinners back when Daniel and I built the company together, back when my opinion still mattered. That night he was loud, charming, confident. He always had that voice that filled a room, the kind people listened to even when he was wrong. I sat across from him in a black dress I'd worn to too many of these events. The waiter poured champagne. Daniel raised his glass and bragged about the new deal, how fast it would close, how perfect the numbers looked. I leaned forward, calm, almost casual. "You should double-check Clause 8, I said quietly. He turned his head, that half-smirk forming before I even finished. "Your place," he said, "is in the kitchen." Then he laughed. So did the investors. It wasn't the first time he'd embarrassed me in public, but it was the first time I didn't feel angry. Just done. I picked up the wine bottle, poured him another glass, and smiled. It was a small, deliberate movement, slow enough for him to notice. He raised his glass again, thinking he'd won some argument I never joined. I remember every second after that, in crystal clarity, the sound of glasses clinking, the smell of steak, the heavy laugh of the man across the table asking Daniel if he ever lets his wife talk numbers. Daniel winked, said something about how I used to be the brains. Used to be. No one at that table knew that Clause 8 wasn't just a suggestion. It was my clause, my signature, my safety net from years ago when we still believed in each other enough to share power. I stayed quiet through dessert, through the valet, handing him his car keys, through the ride home where he talked nonstop about expansion and strategy, never once asking what I thought. I watched the city lights smear across the windshield like gold lines, each one marking the distance between us. When we got home, he went straight to his study, still on calls, still in his world. I went upstairs, washed off my makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back wasn't angry. She was calculating, calm, a version of me that had been waiting for permission to wake up. That night I opened my old laptop, the one he thought I'd stopped using. It still had access to the shared drive, our original contracts, our first investor agreements, and there it was, Clause 8. It read in clean legal English. Any change of ownership or new investment must be approved by both founding partners. Both partners. He'd forgotten that, or maybe he thought I had. I sat there for hours, scrolling through numbers, reviewing the deal he'd just signed. I didn't need to change anything. I just needed to send the right document to the right people. The truth, as it always does, would take care of the rest. Before I went to bed, I walked downstairs. Daniel was asleep on the couch laptop, open wine glass, half empty. I looked at him for a long time. I remembered the man who once pulled all-nighters with me in a tiny apartment, planning a future we thought we'd share. The man who used to say, "Liz, we're unstoppable." Then I looked at him, now successful, proud, untouchable, and realized he'd been right about one thing. We were unstoppable, just not in the way he imagined. The next morning he would lose everything. But that night I simply turned off the lights and whispered to myself Clause 8. Back then, when people still said Daniel and Elizabeth as if we were one name, I believed in him. We met at a conference in Seattle. Two overworked analysts who thought building something from scratch was the most romantic thing in the world. We were broke, stubborn, and addicted to ambition. In the early days, we worked out of our apartment. My desk was the kitchen counter. His was a folding table by the window. I handled numbers contracts and the little things he didn't have patience for, compliance, taxes, projections. He called me his anchor. I liked that word then. When the company started growing, investors loved him. He was tall, confident, charming. Said things like, "We're not building software, we're building the future." I was the quiet one beside him, making sure the math worked. He'd always end his presentations with "couldn't have done it without Elizabeth." The audience would clap. I'd smile, and for a while I thought that was enough. But money changes the air between people. It's slow at first. Little things. The way he stopped saying we and started saying I. The way he made decisions without asking. The way people in the office stopped making eye contact with me when he was around. The shift was subtle, like sand moving under a rug. Then one morning I came into the office and found out I'd been removed from the email threads about funding. Just to simplify the process, he said. Too many cooks. We had our first real argument that night. He said I was too cautious, that I killed momentum with details. I told him details are what keep a company alive. He left the kitchen, slammed the door, and didn't come home until morning. After that, things turned professional at home. We still shared space, but not conversations. I stopped going to his meetings. He stopped asking for my opinion. And when the company finally hit its first $10 million valuation, the article in Forbes called him the self-made CEO. My name wasn't even in the credits. I remember showing him the article, trying to keep my voice steady. Self-made, huh? I said. He grinned, kissed my forehead. It's just press, Liz. Don't overthink it. That was the night I stopped trusting words. The following months were chaos. New investors, new board members, new money. The company was scaling fast, and he loved every minute of it. I was still on the paperwork as co-founder, but no one treated me that way anymore. My role became invisible. At parties, I was Daniel's wife. At home, I was a reminder of where he started something he'd rather forget. Still, I stayed, because I believed loyalty mattered, because walking away felt like losing a part of myself I wasn't ready to bury. Then came the Series C funding, $45 million. That's when he made his final move. He walked into the kitchen one morning, coffee in hand, and said, "We're restructuring. It'll be easier if you're not on the board. You don't have time for this anymore." I looked up from my laptop. "You mean you're taking me off?" He smiled as if I was being unreasonable. "It's just paperwork." "Paperwork," I repeated, "with my name on it." He shrugged. "We'll always be a team." That was the moment the light changed. Something inside me went still. Not angry, just still. That kind of quiet where decisions get made. I signed the resignation papers, but before I did, I added a line in the fine print. One he didn't notice. One the lawyers didn't either. Clause 8. Any change of ownership or major contract must be approved by both founding partners. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I knew one day he'd forget who built the foundation. And when he did, I wanted the truth written somewhere that couldn't be erased. Years passed, the company grew, the house got bigger, the marriage got smaller. He got used to winning, to being the man everyone listened to, and I learned how to disappear quietly, gracefully, without leaving a trace. So when that dinner happened, the one with the investors, the smirk, the glass of wine, I wasn't shocked. I was ready. That night wasn't the start of our story falling apart. It was the ending he'd been writing for years. He just didn't know I still had the pen. The restaurant was one of those downtown Chicago places where every table had a skyline view and a waiting list months long. Daniel liked that kind of setting, rooms that reflected his ego. The deal on the table that night was supposed to be the biggest in the company's history. 2 investors from San Francisco, one from Houston, and a local banker who was more interested in Daniel's charm than his business plan. He'd asked me to come because it looked good to have his wife there, not because he wanted my input. He liked the picture of us together, the polished husband, the elegant wife, the perfect power couple. He knew people trusted a man who looked stable. I sat beside him, smiled when he spoke, nodded at the right moments. It wasn't acting, it was survival. I'd been invisible in those rooms long enough to learn that silence makes people careless. Dinner started with small talk markets, tech stocks, real estate. By the second bottle of wine, Daniel was in his element, telling stories about his early hustle, how he built the company from a 1-bedroom apartment. He told them he took a risk marrying a woman who understood the grind. They laughed. I laughed too softly, because that's what keeps men like him talking. The banker asked a question about the acquisition terms, something about foreign investors and restructuring clauses. I knew exactly what he meant, Clause 8. It was the kind of clause that could break a deal if it wasn't cleared. That's when I said it without looking up. You should double-check Clause 8. The room went quiet for half a second. Daniel's fork stopped midair. Then he chuckled, leaned back, and said, "Your place is in the kitchen." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was polite. The kind of laughter people give when they know something isn't funny, but don't want to make it awkward. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, reached for the wine bottle, and poured him another glass. The sound of the liquid hitting the crystal was louder than anything else in that moment. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for a reaction, but there wasn't one. There didn't need to be. Daniel loved the attention. He kept talking, spinning his stories, bragging about the deal. I studied him, his posture, the way his hands moved. When he felt powerful, the way he looked at those men, like they were the only people in the world who mattered. I wondered if he realized they weren't laughing with him anymore. They were laughing at the performance. One of the investors, a woman from Houston, caught my eye. She didn't smile, just held my gaze for a moment like she knew something. Then she looked down and took another sip of wine. After dessert, Daniel shook hands, promised follow-up meetings, and tipped the waiter too much. On the way out, he said, "Good dinner, huh?" I said, "Perfect." In the car, he was still talking about numbers, valuations, projections. I watched the city pass by the lights of Michigan Avenue streaking across the windshield like gold veins. He looked alive in that light, ambitious, arrogant, unstoppable. When we got home, I went upstairs first. I could hear him in his office calling someone from the board. His voice had that same confident rhythm. It always had the sound of a man who believed the world would always bend to him. I walked into the kitchen, took off my earrings, set them on the counter, and poured myself a glass of wine this time. I thought about what he said. Your place is in the kitchen. He wasn't entirely wrong. The kitchen is where everything begins. Recipes, plans, strategies, quiet revolutions. When he finally came up to bed, he was half drunk on success. He kissed my forehead and mumbled something about big changes tomorrow. Then he turned off the lamp and fell asleep instantly like people do when they've never had to doubt the ground they walk on. I lay awake beside him, eyes open to the ceiling, thinking about the word silent. It shares the same letters as listen. Most men like him never realize that. By the time the clock hit midnight, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Not out of anger, not even revenge, just correction. He'd crossed a line so many times that the map between us didn't exist anymore. He wanted a kingdom without a queen. So I decided to let him have it, and watch what happens when the foundation decides it's done holding him up. Before I turned out the light, I reached for his glass on the nightstand, still half full from dinner. I took it downstairs, washed it, and placed it back in the cabinet. Clean, quiet, out of sight. That was the last time I ever poured him a drink. The next morning, Daniel left early. He had that sharp electric energy he got before big meetings. He kissed my cheek on the way out, said, "Wish me luck," like nothing happened. Like the night before hadn't drawn a line through our marriage. After the door closed, the house went silent, the kind of silence that lets you hear your own heartbeat. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the screen of my old laptop, the same one we used in our apartment when this all began. I hadn't opened it in years, but my hands remembered the password. When the screen lit up, it felt like opening a time capsule. Folder after folder, old business plans, tax filings, and scanned contracts. The roots of everything he built, everything we built. I found what I was looking for, the original partnership agreement. Clause 8. There it was, exactly as I wrote it years ago. Any alteration to company ownership or external investment must be approved by both founding partners. I read it twice. The words felt heavier now, like they'd been waiting all these years for their moment. Daniel's new investors were scheduled to sign that afternoon. They didn't know Clause 8 existed. Neither did the lawyers reviewing the deal. He'd built the company's future on a document that was never actually legal without my consent. I didn't need to hack anything or destroy anything. All I had to do was remind the system what it had already agreed to. I opened a new email. No subject line, no message body, just one attachment, the original contract with both our signatures at the bottom. I addressed it to the board's legal counsel, the auditing firm, and the lead investor. I hovered over send. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't shake. It was just quiet, like the moment before a wave hits the shore. Then I clicked. The sound of the sent email was small, almost gentle, like a door closing in another room. I sat back, finished my coffee, and waited. At 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed, one missed call from Daniel. At 9:18, two more. I didn't answer. I imagined the scene, him walking into that meeting, shaking hands, smiling, and then someone sliding a printout across the table. Watching his face fall as the words requires co-founder approval came up. By 10:05, my inbox filled with forwarded messages, board members, attorneys, auditors, all asking the same question in polite corporate panic. Can you confirm this clause is still active? I typed back one line, yes, it is. Then I closed the laptop. I went for a walk around the neighborhood. It was one of those cold mornings that smell like metal and rain. The sidewalks were wet, reflecting traffic lights like broken glass. I didn't think about what would happen next. I didn't need to. I knew Daniel well enough to predict every move he'd make. First, he'd blame the lawyers, then he'd call me. When I didn't answer, he'd start bargaining. Around noon, he texted, "What did you do then? Another Liz, we can fix this." I didn't reply. There are moments in life when silence isn't avoidance, it's punctuation. At 2 p.m., he showed up at the house. I heard his car door slam his footsteps up the driveway. He came in without knocking, suit jacket off. Tie, loose eyes wild. "Why would you send that?" he demanded. I didn't get up from the table. "Because it's true. You just tanked the deal." "Do you know what this means?" "Yes," I said. "It means you should have read Clause 8. He stood there breathing hard. I could see the numbers running through his head. Investors pulling out calls unanswered, money frozen. For once there was no speech left in him, no charm, just confusion and fear. He whispered, "You wanted to ruin me." I shook my head. "No, Daniel, you did that yourself. I just sent the receipt." He left without slamming the door this time. That's how I knew he was really scared. That night I poured myself another glass of wine and sat by the window. The city lights were soft, almost forgiving. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt balanced. When the phone rang again, I turned it face down. Somewhere downtown, the board was probably holding an emergency meeting, and Daniel was learning finally what it felt like when someone decided not to clean up his mess. I whispered the same 2 words I'd said the night before, Clause 8. And for the first time in years, they didn't sound like protection. They sounded like peace. By Friday morning, the company was in free fall. I didn't have to look for the updates, they came to me. Every notification, every alert, every phone call that I didn't answer was another domino falling. The first investor backed out before lunch. The second suspended all communication until legal irregularities were resolved. By noon, 3 executives had locked their LinkedIn accounts. That's how I knew it was real people protect their online image before they protect each other. Daniel called 12 times that day. He left 5 voicemails. The first one sounded angry. The last one sounded scared. "Liz, please, you have to talk to me. This isn't just me, it's hundreds of employees. We'll lose everything. I need you to retract it. Just say you made a mistake." He didn't understand yet. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't lied or twisted a word. I just reminded the truth it still existed. I went about my day like it was any other. Laundry, groceries, a dentist appointment, ordinary acts of life, while his world cracked. There was something poetic about it, how calm can live right beside collapse. By evening, the news had leaked. Startup faces legal uncertainty over founder agreement. I didn't watch the TV, but I could hear the low buzz of the news anchors from the living room. Their tone was cautious, professional, distant, like they were describing weather in another state. At 8:43 p.m., Daniel came home. I was sitting at the dining table reading. He didn't say hello, just threw his phone on the counter and said, "They want me out." I looked up. "The board?" He nodded. His voice broke a little. "They're calling for an emergency vote tomorrow. They think I misled them. They think I hid the clause on purpose. Did you?" I asked. His silence was the answer. He sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time in years, he looked small. The man who used to fill every room suddenly didn't seem to fit in his own house. "Liz," he said, almost whispering, "why didn't you tell me you'd kept that document?" "Because you stopped listening years ago." He rubbed his eyes like he wanted to erase the last 24 hours. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I shook my head. "No, I'm surviving it." He stood up, paced the room, stopped near the window. The city lights hit his face, sharp lines cutting through the exhaustion. "They'll take the company from me, everything I built." I looked straight at him. "You didn't build it alone." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, full of all the words we'd buried under success. Then he asked, "What do you want?" "Liz money." "A seat on the board. Just tell me." "I don't want anything, Daniel," I said. "I already took back what was mine, the truth." He exhaled hard like a man realizing there's no one left to negotiate with. "They'll ruin me." I took a sip of water steady. "No, Daniel, you'll ruin yourself." He left again that night. Didn't say where he was going. I didn't ask. The house felt lighter without him in it. The next morning, the headline was everywhere: CEO steps down amid investor fallout. It was brutal in its simplicity. Reporters camped outside our gate by noon. Calls poured in. Friends, relatives, people I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't ready to explain that justice doesn't always look like victory. It just looks like balance. At 3 in the afternoon, his assistant came to the house to pick up some of his things. She couldn't look me in the eye. She said softly, "He asked me to tell you he's sorry." I nodded. For which part? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night I walked past his office. The door was open, lights still on. His desk was empty except for a single framed photo our first year in business. We were both smiling, holding the prototype of the app we thought would change the world. In a way it did, just not how we expected. I sat in his chair and stared at the empty screen for a while. The room smelled like old paper and arrogance. Then I opened the drawer. His wedding ring was there next to his company ID badge. He'd left them both behind. I closed the drawer. The sound was soft, final. By the end of that week, Daniel Grant's name was removed from the company's website. His biography disappeared from press releases, his voice from promotional videos. It was as if he'd never existed. And me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt the air change lighter, quieter, fairer. When people fall from that high, they don't crash all at once. They crumble in slow motion. You can almost hear the silence between the cracks. That was the sound I heard that night before I went to bed. The day after the resignation hit the news, the phone finally stopped ringing. The world had moved on to a new scandal, a new CEO, a new headline. That's the thing about America. People love a downfall, but only for a day. Daniel didn't come home that night, or the night after. I assumed he was staying in one of those sterile hotel suites downtown, the kind built for men who've lost something but pretend they haven't. I didn't ask. There was nothing left to talk about. Monday morning, I went back to work at the same financial firm I'd joined part-time after stepping down from the company. My coworkers were polite, careful. They didn't bring it up, but their eyes said everything. She's the one who took down her husband. I didn't correct them. They weren't wrong. That afternoon, I got an email from a board member, short, professional, no warmth. We appreciate your clarification regarding Clause 8. The board has initiated a full audit. We wish you well. I closed the email, leaned back in my chair, and laughed quietly. It wasn't joy, just release, the kind that comes after years of swallowing things too heavy to name. Around 5, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. I didn't answer. He texted, "Meet me, please, just talk." I sat there staring at the screen. A part of me wanted to ignore him forever, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. So I typed back, 1 hour, at the house. When I got home, his car was already in the driveway. He was sitting on the front steps in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, no suit, no tie, no mask. He looked smaller, softer. I stood by the door, arms crossed. "You shouldn't be here," he nodded. "I know. So why are you?" He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck. "Because I can't believe this is how it ends." I didn't say anything. I let him fill the silence. He always hated silence. "I lost everything, Liz," he said finally. "The board froze my accounts. The investors pulled out. Even the people I thought were friends, they won't take my calls." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the people who laughed with you that night?" He winced. I didn't mean what I said. I was showing off. "That's the problem, Daniel. You've been showing off for years." He looked down, eyes glassy. "You could have told me. You could have warned me before you sent that email." "I tried," I said softly. "For years. You just never heard me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, desperate. "We can fix this. I can start over. I just need you to help me talk to the investors." I shook my head. "No. You need to learn to stand in the mess you made. That's the only fix left." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then quietly, "You're really leaving." "I already left," I said. "You just didn't notice." He looked around the living room like he was seeing it for the first time, the framed photos, the vase of fresh flowers, the space we'd shared for 15 years. He whispered I thought we were a team. "We were," I said, "until you started keeping score." There was nothing else to say. He stood up, walked toward the door, and stopped with his hand on the handle. "Liz," he said, "I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded. "You just didn't care if you did." He left. That night I packed quietly. Not everything, just what mattered. A few clothes, my laptop, the original documents, and the divorce papers I'd had ready for months but never filed. I placed them on the kitchen table. The next morning he came back to get his things. The house was empty, except for the sound of his shoes on the hardwood floor. He saw the envelope on the table, his name on the front, and stopped. He didn't open it right away. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he hoped it was something else, but when he did, the air went still. He looked up at me standing by the stairs. His face was pale, almost boyish. "You're really doing this, yes, after everything, because of everything." He took a deep breath, set the papers down. "You'll regret it." I smiled faintly. "I've regretted worse." He didn't fight, didn't argue. just walked out the door quiet as a man walking away from his own shadow. After he left, I sat at the table for a long time. The sunlight hit the papers, and for the first time in years, the kitchen didn't feel like a cage. It felt like closure. That afternoon, I got a message from one of the investors, the woman from Houston, the only one who'd met my eyes at dinner. She wrote, "I read Clause 8. Smart move. Hope you're doing okay." I replied, "Better than I've been in a long time." By evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. I didn't toast. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. He'd lost his title, his pride, his kingdom, and I'd lost my silence. Different prices, same payment. The weeks that followed were strangely calm. The chaos outside didn't touch me. No more late-night phone calls. No more board meetings in our kitchen. No more pretending we were still the couple everyone envied. It was just me, my thoughts, and a quiet that felt earned. Daniel moved out for good. I didn't ask where he went. Mutual friends said he was staying at a small rental in Lincoln Park trying to figure things out. I knew what that meant. He was still negotiating with himself, trying to make sense of how the man who built everything could lose it all to silence. The press lost interest fast. The story died the way all corporate scandals die quietly. The headlines moved on. Investors rebranded, and a new CEO took his seat. Someone younger, cheaper, less married. My divorce went through in 6 weeks. No fight, no contest. He didn't even show up in court. His lawyer handed me the final papers with a nod, and that was it. 15 years reduced to a stamped signature. I took back my maiden name, Grant, not for nostalgia, but because it felt like pressing restart. I rented a small apartment near the lake, the kind of place with too much light and just enough quiet. The first night there, I couldn't sleep. The space was too still, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful yet, because it's still new. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and caught my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I didn't look like someone's wife. I just looked like me. I started consulting again, helping small startups run their finances, right? Word spread fast. Founders liked that I understood both sides. They didn't ask for details, but they knew my name. The industry always remembers the woman who cost a man his empire. One afternoon, about the month after the divorce, I got an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Coffee." It was from Claire, the investor from Houston, the only one who hadn't laughed that night at the restaurant. We met at a small cafe downtown. She was direct calm, the kind of woman who'd built her career by recognizing talent before it was obvious. She smiled when she saw me. "You handled it with grace," she said. I laughed softly. "That's one word for it." She stirred her coffee. "What's next for you? I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Maybe something smaller, simpler." She leaned back. "You ever think about helping women like you? Smart, capable, but talked over by men who mistake volume for value." That sentence stayed with me. 2 months later, I joined her firm as an advisor. We started a small fund investing in female founders who'd been pushed aside, ignored, underestimated. It was the most satisfying work I'd ever done. Meanwhile, Daniel vanished from public life. His LinkedIn disappeared. His phone number changed. Every once in a while, someone mentioned spotting him working as a consultant living quietly somewhere in the suburbs. I didn't check. Some ghosts are best left unchased. One evening, almost a year later, I was invited to a corporate panel, Women in Leadership. The irony didn't escape me. When I walked on stage, the host introduced me as Elizabeth Grant, co-founder of the former Grant Tech. Former. That word used to sting. Now it sounded like freedom. After the event, a young woman came up to me. She was nervous, clutching her notebook. "How did you know when to stop fighting?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, when I realized silence can be louder than shouting. She nodded slowly, like she understood something I didn't have to explain. That night, I drove home past the old building, our old headquarters. The lights were still on. Different people, different faces, same glow through the glass walls. I parked for a minute, just watching. For years, I'd associated that place with pain, betrayal, loss. But now, looking at it from the outside, it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt irrelevant. When I got back to my apartment, I lit a candle, opened a bottle of red, and sat by the window. The city outside was calm, the kind of quiet that holds stories instead of noise. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number. For a moment, I thought about answering. Then I turned it face down. Whatever it was, whoever it was, it could wait. I'd spent too long being available for someone else's chaos. Outside, the lake shimmered under the streetlights. The reflection looked like a heartbeat. I raised my glass slightly, not in a toast, just a small acknowledgement. To survival, to peace, to the version of me that didn't need to be seen to be powerful. The night was silent, and for once it felt like the sound of victory. A full year has passed since the night everything came apart. People still bring it up sometimes quietly like gossip they're afraid I might hear. The story has softened in the retelling. I'm not the wife who took her husband down anymore. I'm just Elizabeth Grant, former co-founder, now advisor. That title fits better. Life has a rhythm again. I wake up early, walk along the lake, make coffee strong enough to bite back. I work with founders who remind me of the woman I used to be. Sharp, cautious, trying to prove themselves in rooms that weren't built for them. When I tell them to read every clause, they laugh, not realizing how literal that advice is. Sometimes when I open a new client's contract, I see something buried in the fine print and feel the same chill I did that night in Chicago. I always circle it in red ink and say, "Don't sign until you understand what this means." They usually thank me later. Daniel and I haven't spoken since the divorce papers were finalized. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he moved to Arizona. He does consulting work for small businesses, now quiet, private, forgettable. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him well either. I just wish him awareness. Every so often, I catch myself wondering if he ever thinks about that dinner, the one where he told me to stay in the kitchen. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Either way, it's not my burden to carry anymore. What people don't tell you about revenge is that the real satisfaction doesn't come from watching someone fall. It comes from no longer caring if they do. Revenge is the first step. Peace is the last. I keep the original Clause 8 document in a folder on my laptop. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A single paragraph that changed the trajectory of 2 lives. One line of text that said in plain English, "You cannot erase me." Some nights I still pour a glass of wine and think about how small moments, one sentence, one smirk, one email can tilt an entire world. I don't regret sending it. If I hadn't, I'd still be living in a house built on silence. Now I live in a place built on choice. Mine. A few months ago, Claire and I launched a mentoring program for women founders over 40. We called it Second Draft. The tagline reads, "You're never too old to edit your story." Every time I read it on the website, I smile, because that's exactly what I did. I rewrote the ending. During our first session, one of the women asked me, "What made you finally walk away?" I told her the truth. I didn't walk away. I just stopped standing still. She cried a little. I did too. It felt good. Clean, honest, uncomplicated. These days, my life isn't loud. There are no headlines, no late-night arguments, no boardroom wars. Just steady work, quiet dinners, and mornings that start with peace instead of pressure. I still check the markets, still love the precision of numbers, but I've learned they only tell part of the story. The rest lives in choices, tone, and timing. Last week, I ran into one of Daniel's former investors at a conference. He hesitated before approaching me, unsure if I'd recognize him. "Elizabeth," he said finally, "I never told you this, but that clause, it saved a lot of people money." I smiled. That wasn't the point, I said, but I'm glad it helped. He laughed nervously, said something about how poised I always seemed. I didn't correct him. Poise is just what's left when the chaos burns away. That night back in my apartment, I wrote the final note for a podcast. I've been planning stories from women who rebuilt their lives after betrayal. I called it Silent Partners. The first episode starts with my own voice. My name is Elizabeth Grant, and the last time I poured my husband a glass of wine, it cost him his empire. Full circle. I recorded the intro 3 times before I got it right. When I finished, I sat back, listening to the playback. My voice sounded different. Steady older, sure. If someone asked me now whether it was worth it, I'd say yes. Not because he lost, but because I learned. About power, about quiet, about how the truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Before I turn off the lights each night, I whisper the same thing I did the morning it all began, Clause 8. But now it means something else. Not a warning, not a weapon, a promise to myself. To never let anyone define my silence again. So if you're listening to this, maybe you're sitting in your car or washing dishes or trying to forget a voice that once made you feel small, remember this. You don't need to shout to be strong. Sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. If my story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, listen, tell them about Silent Partners. Maybe it helps someone find their own Clause 8, the line that says enough. Because revenge stories aren't really about vengeance. They're about freedom.